I'm super excited to be talking with Barbara Twist. She is a filmmaker and exhibition consultant and has been involved in the independent exhibition sector for over a decade. She was previously the managing director of Art House Convergence and has consulted for a range of film and exhibition organizations, including Europa Cinemas, Europa International, and Indie Collect. I first learned about Barbara when she was reopening the famous Vidiots because I was stalking online. They're a nonprofit LA-based movie theater and video store. I then got to experience her incredible organizing and commuting talents when I attended the Film Festival Alliance conference in Chicago in 2023. And then I became a full-on fangirl and stan of Barbara when she gave a speech on the importance of windowing at a Sundance Catalyst event here in New York. And that speech is why she had to be the one to discuss here the art and science and importance of windowing a film and what that actually means and looks like today for indie filmmakers. So, hi, Barbara. Thank you for doing this video.
Thank you, Christy, for having me. I've thought a lot about why is it that I'm so interested in windowing. And part of it, I think, is that I was born in 1989, and I really experienced what I consider to be the peak era of windowing. I was that person who, went to see movies in theaters, waited until, you saw the trailer on TV that said like, DVD coming on Tuesday, right? And I'd go to the video store that Friday. I'd beg my mom to spend the $250 on the new release, and then she'd be like, "What are you talking about? You're getting the 2 for 1, Wait for that." And then I remember we still watched TV, like linear TV, and you would, a couple of years later, you'd just be like, "Oh, I'm sick. I'm staying home from school. It's the weekend." And you would see a movie come up on TV and you're like, "Oh, yes, I've been meaning to rewatch this," and I feel like I really benefited from that. And it made so much sense to me as a kid because you're like, oh, here as a child, I watched the same movie 3, 4, 5 times because there was distance, time elapsed in between each time I watched it and I enjoyed it. And it was a different experience, right? You go to the movie theater, it's this big moment, the film's new, you're going with some people. And when you rent it later on, you're renting it for a sleepover, you're renting it to watch with friends at home, you're renting it because it's the only film the 6 people in your family can agree on.
Yep.
And then it shows up on TV later and you're half paying attention because you're sick or you're skipping school or, whatever the thing is, right? And so I think it made a lot of sense to me. And I just happened to be in that exact moment when DVD really started flourishing, when you had that experience. And so to watch the decline, the sort of collapsing of the windows in my lifetime after I experienced their rapid expansion has just been very interesting. And sort of the more consolidated that Hollywood becomes and the more the more conglomeration that occurs, the more mergers that occur, I'm just watching, what I assume to be very smart people leave money on the table and exclude audiences and just like moment by moment, it's like how much closer can the studio get to the finish of the film so they can just write it off and be like, all right, we did it. It's done. Let's move on to the next, and that's not the model that works for the creative, artistic space that we live in. And in fact, there is so much money to be made, when we really consider the long windows. But yes, I've been thinking about it since that speech, like, why is it that I'm so interested in windows? I'm like,
I think that's part of it. What? Well, one, you're incredibly intelligent and experienced on this topic, so you've been working in it and can theorize about it. So in addition to being at that peak age for it, but it's so true. I think we also, when with technology, and you could then release a film online and go direct to audience, you could do a day and date release. You could save your money on marketing because you could tell people to go theaters or online. So I think for a while there was this idea that we could save money on marketing, but if we're going to do the ads anyway, might as well do it when it's available for everybody. And now we're seeing, and your speech really enlightens, that it doesn't quite work that way. It's not the best way. It doesn't build brand awareness, doesn't help your career as a filmmaker, and definitely doesn't benefit you financially in the long run.
yes, it's very much about the immediacy, the immediate access to money. Right. If a studio or distributor is going, whether it's direct to audience through their own streaming platform or a filmmaker is going direct to audience, you essentially capture all of that money for yourself. And I think for some, that makes sense. Or why would I share it with other people? But what you miss out on is that alchemy that comes together. It is a small price to pay for the powerhouse marketing that the independent and even commercial mainstream cinemas do in this country. You know, everything that's associated with that, the radio interviews that come along, the podcast interviews, the just excitement around the event of a premiere, and all the other elements, right? The marketing that a video store would have done, all these different component pieces that I think, unfortunately, there seems to be a view right now that sharing your revenue is bad without acknowledging that, yes, you share your revenue when you really exploit all the windows, but there's so much you're gaining from each of those. And I will say the tide has turned once again, because this is our industry and we're always like every day, like, oh, look at this thing that we did 10 years ago and all of a sudden it's brand new. There's been a lot of articles recently about how, surprise, surprise, opening in theaters actually does generate more revenue downstream. Who knew? Only everyone ever who's still running companies, they found it out in the 80s with VHS, and yeah, it's still true. So
It's such a we're starting to like snowball deep. I knew this would happen. Like I just want to keep picking your brain. But let's go back to the super, super basics, because
yeah.
for people who don't know the definition, and it was helpful for me to rehear it, what actually is windowing, or what does it mean to window a film?
Yes. So prior to the age of streaming, a film typically moved through the following windows, and I have jotted them down. So if I look off screen, it's just so I can be precise.
Cool.
So the first is theatrical, right? That is, the film is released in a movie theater. Could be one screen, generally was multi-city, but might have started out New York, LA. That's called a platform release. You start out New York, LA, and then over time you build and expand. Or it might have been a wide release. That's very traditional for, Gladiator 2, right? The Friday
Every
it comes
theater.
out everywhere. You can't blink and,
Moana too.
um, so the theatrical traditionally might have taken 1 to 2 years. And that's because you had the first run theaters, and they might have it for up to a year. Again, thinking even at wide release, it might take a couple weeks to get to your small town movie theater, right? I grew up in Grand Rapids, or technically I grew up in Ada outside of Grand Rapids. We had the Ada Lowell 5. Sometimes they got big movies the very first weekend that it opened. Sometimes it might take a couple weeks because it was going to go to Celebration Cinema in downtown Grand Rapids and then move out to us. The other component of that is what used to be called dollar theaters, the second run theaters.
We had one of those in my neighborhood. Yes.
So those were movie theaters that would pick up a film a couple, like down the line. So it might have been, I don't know exactly, I would imagine 2 or 3 months after the film had been out in theaters, and they would offer the movie for a lot less. It could be $5, or in a dollar theater, it was $1. But the film could be 6 to 12 months old. However, because it was not yet available any other way, people would still pay to go see it. And it was a great cost-effective way for families to go, a great way to catch a film that maybe you had missed earlier. And because the way that studios recoup their money theatrically is that each week that a film is in theaters, they charge a percentage of box office gross. And that tends to go down over time. So the first week it might be X, the second week it's X minus 5, the third week it's X minus 10. Probably not that dramatic, but something along those lines, right? So a dollar movie theater could afford to only charge $1 because they were paying a much lower percentage to the studio. So that, yeah, would have taken 1 to 2 years. Then you would move into pay-per-view. This was not all films, but definitely this was HBO. This was if you were an early adopter of cable TV and, your parents, had the fancy one where like their credit card was hooked up and you'd pay like $20 a month, or you would buy it anyway and it would show up on their bill at the end of the month and they'd be like, who rented this film? And you'd have to like fork over the dollars. I never did that. Um, Pay-per-view was a way that you would watch it on your TV, but you would watch it in advance of it coming up, but it would be a much higher price point. The corollary today, I think, would be PVOD, which is premium video on demand. So a similar price point, you get it in advance. However, you have streaming subscription platforms, so like SVOD platforms that may also offer PVOD. Disney Plus is a great example of this. They will often place their own films on Disney Plus, but in order to access them, not only do you pay the $149.99 a year, you also have to pay an additional $20 to $30 to unlock that film.
I think one of my favorite ones recently was the Taylor Swift concert film, which was only available to rent. You could only have it for 48 hours. You have to buy it again every single time. And then months later, it was available on Disney Plus.
Yep. Yeah. And it's a great way to, take advantage of people's interest in something, right? Like
There's high demand. Yeah.
Absolutely. So after pay-per-view, you would go to video rental, and that would be 1 to 2 years after the film came out. And that would be, often exclusive to the video store. You might get someone like Blockbuster, who has made an exclusive deal to have that film in their stores for a set amount of time before your local movie theater, or like ours was Family Video, got it. And so there's some exclusivity amongst video stores that, of course, Blockbuster was able to leverage, because I wouldn't say they had a monopoly, but by golly, they were really big and they had a lot of stores, and they certainly pushed out a lot of independent video stores.
They did, because I remember walking into one and there'd be like a wall. When Titanic came out, Titanic got a whole wall, whereas my local video store would have 2 or 3.
Yes, because your local video store was often purchasing the title, and so then they're going to have to keep it in their library, whereas Blockbuster, because of their size and scale, were able to cut deals with the studios. That's a really big part of how they were able to sustain themselves and grow so significantly, was that they would cut a deal with the studio where they could bring on a huge number, but they didn't have to purchase them. They were essentially renting them, right? And there'd be some sort of buyback situation. It's very similar to how I imagine like a Barnes & Noble works or something like that. You don't have to pay for all of the things that you get, but there's some level of buyback.
Makes sense.
Works for the studio, works for Blockbuster, doesn't work for the independent video store, but we know how that goes.
Yep.
Then you moved on to the DVD release, and that was, could be 12 to 18 months after a film's theatrical has ended. So this film was already available in the video store for rent, and then you would have the DVD. The DVD or the VHS would then be available to purchase. And so if you went to a video store growing up, you'll recall you go into the video store and there would be a sticker, and it would say, $2.99 to rent, $14.99 to buy. And you could just take that right up, or you could go to your Target or Amoeba or Tower Records or whatever, and purchase films that way. So the DVD release really came, often a year or a year and a half after theatrical. So if you loved the movie in theaters and then it came out at the video store, you're going to race to see it, race to pick it up. And a couple weeks later, you're going to go back into that video store and it's going to be available to purchase. And you might just say, you know what? I might rent this film a couple more times, so it is more cost effective to purchase it. And there you go, right? The studio or the filmmaker has now made multiples of money on you because you've seen it in different ways.
Yep.
After the DVD release, eventually it makes its way onto pay TV. So that's going to be cable. So you don't necessarily have to pay for it, but someone is paying. There's no ads. And so you are paying through your subscription to Comedy Central or something like that, right? To get access. And then after that, you're going to have free TV. That's going to be 3 to 5 years after the theatrical release. That, because it relies on advertising, it's going to be a lower rate that the studio or filmmaker will sell those rights for. So that's why it's going to be a lot later in the windowing. And all along here, you've got ancillary and non-theatrical. So that means showing in airlines, educational, community screenings, but also things like people don't consider places like prisons, churches,
And hospitals.
They also have to pay rights in order to show things. And so those are all bundled under ancillary rights. and non-theatrical rights. And so I'm not entirely sure when a film would show up on an airline after it's come out in theaters, but I would imagine it's somewhere around the pay TV or free TV window.
I know it used to be something would be on an airline and it felt like it was months before you'd be able to get it at home or on DVD. Now it's collapsing for reasons you'll go into, but it
Yep.
feels like it's still slightly ahead of maybe when it's online.
Yes, exactly. Because I remember I definitely could not see the Thomas Crown Affair at the movie theater, nor would I have wanted to. But I was flying back from England when I was 10, and I was the only one of my family awake. And so I watched the Thomas Crown Affair, and then I watched Being John Malkovich like 3 times back to back.
Oh my gosh, at 10. Must have seemed so whimsical to a 10-year-old.
I mean, that may be the reason I'm in film. That's Being John Malkovich is a real mind bender, shall we say.
Yes.
But yeah, so, of course there's exceptions. There were films that were straight to video. They were more emphasized then, right? Because there would literally be a section at the video store called straight to video. And they had a certain quality about them, sort of like Disney Channel original films, right? The idea was this film is good for people to watch, but not worth the money to, kind of put on this big marketing campaign and put it in theaters. Or we can churn this film out really quick. We are just trying to make money. Let's put it out. Now you have a lot of films that end up being straight to streaming, but it can mean very different things. A straight to streaming on Netflix might be a movie where they spent $250 million to make it, or it might be a film that someone spent a couple $1,000,000 to make. It premiered at a well-known film festival and just didn't get picked up anywhere by a distributor and ends up straight to streaming. So the straight to video, straight to streaming means something very different today than it did then. But on the whole, you're looking at 2 to 5 years for that initial release. So you think about how many entry points, how many marketing opportunities, how many opportunities to generate revenue over 2 to 5 years. That's a pretty sustainable
Yeah.
situation.
Meanwhile, you can start the next project. At this point, the film is going to be, as a filmmaker, you already moved on to the next one because you don't have to stay with it the whole time, and which I
Correct.
think has changed a little bit. But it's also, it was a preset path, I guess. But
Yeah.
what is that path now? Does that path exist now?
I think for some films that path does still exist. It's just on a very accelerated timeline. And so now a film's windows might include theatrical, PVOD, which is that premium video on demand, TVOD, which is something like iTunes or Vudu, SVOD, right? That's your Netflix, Prime, Hulu. You're paying a subscription, getting films, that don't cost you anything in the sense that you've already paid a subscription fee. AVOD, that's advertising, ad-based video on demand. There's also FAST, FAST. And so those are Tubi, Pluto. It is essentially what you experienced watching linear television, except it's not linear, right? So it's advertising revenue that supports your ability to watch these films. So a 2-hour movie takes 3.5 hours because every 10 minutes there's an ad. But we all survived for millennia doing that, so it's good.
I've probably seen A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger 100 times, right? Because I think it was TBS, one of those like free
Yeah.
stations used to play it or was included in my cable package, and I saw it with all of the commercials many times. I survived.
That is how I feel about Pretty Woman. Anytime I'm at a hotel, I turn on the TV and Pretty Woman is on. Makes a lot of sense. And so you see what's going on. When you watch ads, you find out, I don't know, what dealership is having a deal on cars in your community. It's great.
Etc. I don't know any jingles anymore because I don't get those ads.
That's true. You also have physical media, which is going to be your DVD, sometimes a VHS. And there's a couple of films that have come out recently that have done a VHS release, and then ancillary and non-theatrical. But I think the trick is that you have all those windows today, or rather you have all of those release strategies, but they don't necessarily happen in that order, nor do they happen at the same cadence for every film, on kind of an industry-wide level. So it is not necessarily film by film, but it could be genre by genre. It could be distributor by distributor, right? One studio takes an approach to do this with their films. Horror films tend to be released in this way, right? Horror films, I would imagine, over-index on physical media because that's a big repeat viewership opportunity. Whereas, a film, again, that is a Hulu original, a Netflix original, a Prime original, is unlikely to be available on physical media. Sometimes they'll do a collaboration with Criterion or something like that. But in general, you would never even get to that physical media window because that's not something that they prioritize.
It's true. Well, the goals are different. It's subscribers and minutes viewed. That's kind of
Yes,
it. Once
exactly.
you're in, how do they keep you in?
Yeah. I would say one of the biggest changes between how it was before and how it is now is, this is just sort of my theory, is that before it was really about the film and now it's really about the company. So
Oh,
whereas
interesting.
before it was like, how do you exploit this film? And the film is going to make money for the company,
Right.
for the filmmakers, for the folks who created it. Whereas now a lot of the films coming out are there to support people subscribing to the streaming platform, to support the brand building that is then going to turn around and get you to buy merch or something associated with it. And so it's, even though the people involved, I think, are still very focused on the film, there's sort of this layer that is a lot more about building the brand of the company over the individual film or even the individual film artist.
I could see that. I could, and as someone who subscribes to all the streamers, I would even take a more cynical approach of it is about shareholder stock prices. It's at the end of the day, it's not about the transactions or even the revenue. It's how many subscribers, how many minutes watched, and then revenue in order to have the company be perceived as more valuable.
Absolutely. And that's why you get that shortening of windows because they're trying to squeeze as much as they can in a short amount of time because they, a company now that's owned by shareholders, they're going to spend money to make the film in Q1 of 2024. And they have got a ticking clock to see revenue come in from that film in order to positively affect their shareholder price. I always make the joke that the best Netflix subscriber to Netflix is the one who subscribes and never watches anything.
It's just, yes.
Because it costs money every time you watch on Netflix, right?
Oh,
They've got
yeah.
to pay. Now, it might only be pennies or fractions of pennies, but for any, and this, it's always Netflix, the one that I dunk on, but and of course,
They're the biggest,
yeah,
they're successful, so we get to do that.
yeah. Any subscription platform is like that to a certain degree that, they do have to pay every time you watch. And so, they're looking to get subscribers. And so the reason that they are investing in certain types of films, at the end of the day, again, the people who work there and who are developing the films may genuinely believe that, they're here to do that work because this is a mission, this is a creative mandate. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the reason that they're targeting a specific audience or targeting a specific type of film is because they have identified audience opportunity there, a new subscriber opportunity. And once they get as many of those subscribers as they can, they will look for another.
Yep.
Um,
I think it's another analogy I've heard of. It's like a gym membership. As once you pay that membership, we don't need everybody to go. The gym will be packed if everybody goes. I go to Planet Fitness, meaning I pay $10 a month for Planet Fitness and I don't go. So I am exactly the subscriber they want. This is all like incredible and like not even theoretical. This is very practical, and you do such an incredible job explaining this. So thank you. So now I'm a filmmaker. Well, how do I think about windowing? I've finished my film. Hopefully you're thinking about distribution earlier, or I'm thinking about it earlier. How do I imagine windowing for my independent film?
yes. First, it starts out with your goals, right? So, what really are your goals with the film? Are you looking to have a very traditional release strategy, right? Sort of what I described of you're going to play in theaters, you're going to be available for rent, all that kind of thing. Most people will say yes, of course, right? That's the dream. So then you have to align your resources with that dream. What amount of money do you have? You sort of look at what are your resources in terms of festival premiere, right? Like, have you premiered at a more prominent film festival? Do you have access to film festivals? Have you played a ton of regional film festivals and therefore built up a potential audience and have been capturing their email addresses and information along the way?
Very
Uh,
important.
yes. So what kind of camp do you fall in? Are you looking for a distributor partner to come on board and take over that process for you? I'm going to assume that in this situation, you have premiered at a great festival, you're showing at regional festivals across the country, but you are not necessarily in the position of selling your film to a larger distributor. So, because I think that that's like statistically, that is the situation that most filmmakers find themselves in. And I think it's important from the jump to know that you are at the beginning of your journey and that you have a lot of exciting opportunities ahead of you. So, the first is to make sure you're collecting that data from the festivals that you're playing as much as you can. Even if you can't collect individual data, you can establish a relationship with that film festival. So when you come back to that town to show the film theatrically, maybe they'll send out a notice on your behalf to those ticket buyers or something like that. So in terms of your goals, first, if you want to play theatrically, you want to think through, what is your goal in theatrical? Are you doing it to qualify for awards, which means that you have to play in certain cities for a certain length of time? And be mindful that in order to play those cities for a certain length of time, you may pay a higher price in order to be in those, right? It's often called forewalling. And that's where you pay a flat fee to the exhibitor and then you play the film, and the exhibitor, it doesn't, of course they want people to show up, but they're not necessarily going to be marketing it. So
They got paid up front. Yeah.
yeah, if 0 people show up, that's not totally their problem. And so that's one way, if you're awards. But if you're really trying to just get people to see it, then I would consider, how do you do a theatrical on your own? And so that's going to be either reaching out to someone who is a booking consultant, someone who has relationships with theaters across the country. Or if you have the time yourself, then you're going to become a booking consultant. And the way you're going to become a booking consultant is you are going to get on Google. You are going to open up Google Maps. You're going to take the list of places that you premiered or played at film festivals, and you're going to look up the movie theater within 30 to 40 miles. You're going to compile that list. Then you're going to go on all their websites. You're going to find their contact information, and you're just going to start calling. And you're going to say, hey, I played my film at this film festival in your city, your town, your, region on this date. We had this many people come. It was really dynamic. I'm bringing the film back. I'm doing a road show. Would you be open to playing my film? Could we split the box office? And start there, right? Because you don't really want to have to pay up front. That requires a lot of resources. And you're asking the theater to, take a risk on you. But you're also saying, there's a demonstrated audience. Mm-hmm. I have this relationship with the film festival, and here's the type of marketing I can bring to the table. So you're going to tell them about your fantastic trailer. You're going to tell them about the physical assets you have, the poster that you have that you will provide to them so they can put it up in their poster case. And you're going to talk about the community outreach partners that you either will reach out to or you've already reached out to. And so you're going to build yourself a little roadshow in that way. I think it can be nice if you look at Hundreds of Beavers, are a great example of a roadshow that initially started in one region. And just that's sometimes a little bit easier because you've got buzz spreading a bit more organically, word of mouth. And it can be helpful to kind of, if you're just getting in your car and traveling in that way. You could also choose to play in cities that are related to the film, cities where you have a personal relationship. Your theatrical can be one screening on one night, or it can be 1,000 screenings in 1,000 different theaters. It's just the scale of what you want to do and the amount of work you're willing to put in. So that's the theatrical piece. Most people want to end up on some level of TVOD or SVOD, something like that. So an advantage to building your own theatrical is that you can demonstrate box office, which is why it's better to do a box office split instead of four-walling, because if you four-wall, there's not box office data to report to ComScore, which means that you're not going to have a box office report to generate. And a lot of the SVOD platforms want to see a certain level of box office in order to trigger either some sort of deal or willingness to market, that type of thing. Often those deals only come through distributors. However, if you do a theatrical run, you generate box office, it also gives you an opportunity to go back to some of those distributors and say, hey, we just did the theatrical. Here's what we generated box office wise. Would you want to partner with us for the digital release? And that's a little bit lower of a lift, less money upfront from them. And you've just done the theatrical yourself. So you've recouped a lot of that money yourself. And so that helps you be able to bring more resources to the table with the distributor. And I think when you talk with a distributor, it is very helpful to have resources already to bring to the table. And when I say resources, I do mean cash. It's always great to have, a celebrity who's willing to retweet or reshare, but that is rarely going to turn into ticket buyers. Nor is having, being like, well, New York City is my hometown and all of my friends will come out. 7 of your friends will come out. Like, I love your friends, but it's just, you've got
It's
to come
conflicting
with,
schedules. You're gonna have that first opening weekend. People are busy. Yes.
exactly. So you've got to have that cash. So either you ask your investors from the jump, hey, you're putting in X amount of money for this film. I would like you to pledge an additional amount that you will pay out if we reach this stage. Maybe that stage is if we get into one of these 6 film festivals, you'll kick in an extra $25,000, $50,000 to go towards distribution. If we don't get into one of these, you will kick in this amount of money. And so having that conversation with your investors from the jump, I also have to believe that they will be impressed by you and excited for that, because that shows that you are not only thinking about making the film, but you're thinking about getting the film out into the world where it's going to make money, it's going to recoup, and then that investor is going to get paid back. I often find it very interesting how you could focus on raising the money just for making the film, but then the thought is like, oh, well, then a distributor will come in and they'll handle, actually getting the investors repaid and that type of thing. And this is no shade to producers who are busting their ass and like trying to raise that money. I know, I can imagine how difficult it is to ask for even more money up front. And also, I think there's a way to package it to explain and just the reality that in the last 10 years, the market has changed, 20 times. It's roiling, it's new, it's different, and you've got to be upfront with your investors about the possibilities of these things. So I'd say you've got theatrical, then you're going on to some type of subscription platform.
For those subscription
TVOD.
platforms, would you go in for TVODs? If you can't do a distributor, would you use an aggregator essentially? Is that the option?
I
Okay.
think that is the option in this case is you've got to go with an aggregator in order to get on a TVOD platform or an SVOD platform. With AVOD, I do believe you can reach out to Tubi. And I don't know if Pluto is the same way. They may ultimately route you through a partner aggregator,
Yeah.
but some of those platforms are, because they're still building their content libraries, they may be willing to do a direct deal with you. And I would also consider, don't just go to SVOD first and then go to AVOD. I would say meet with an aggregator, discuss what TVOD and SVOD look like, and at the same time meet with AVOD and really compare there, because there's a number of films that are getting released, directly in AVOD, and the percentage is going to be better for you because the ad-based platform has got ads to support a lot of that. And you may find that for your particular film, you're going to make more revenue through AVOD than through SVOD or TVOD.
It feels like right now people are sharing more and more case studies so we can get some transparency on those numbers. Because to your point, the percentage kind of goes down at each stage a little bit. And so if you are putting the film in theaters and you have four-walled, you get all the ticket sales. If you are doing licensed non-theatrical events, you're getting that licensing fee. So by the time if you go to AVOD with an aggregator or distributor, they'll get a percentage, and then you're looking at, cents on views. And so what's fast channel or streaming or however that's going in the AVOD in Tubi, If there's no marketing towards it, how are people going to find it? So it sounds like that's part of the window thing is it's trickling down. You're going to who can pay the most and is most interested in to like who is maybe never going to see this film, but if they stumble upon it, they will enjoy it once they start watching it. So you get the dollars from the advertising.
Exactly. And that follows the very traditional modeling of the long tail, right? Like your initial, your theatrical, your premiere, that's what's going to make the most amount of money. And over time, it's going to be a smaller and smaller and smaller amount of money. But the theory of the long tail is that it never quite disappears. I mean, you may be getting a check once every 5 years for 2 cents, but that's still money. So it's really just kind of going on forever and ever and ever at a very low amount. Because there is always going to be someone who clicks on it, someone who's going to give it a watch. The other thing I would say is that just like when you're considering a distributor at the beginning of your journey, right? If you premiere at a film festival, you're looking to sell the film, you're going to ask a lot of questions of that distributor. What are they going to bring to the table? Is it a culture fit? Is it is it a fit for the film? Is their understanding of who the film's audience is aligned with yours? If it doesn't, ask some more questions. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe there's a bigger audience than you thought. But as you go through the process, make sure you're continuing that, right? So when you're looking for an SVOD platform or a TVOD platform or AVOD, or maybe you're going your own route and doing YouTube, like continue to ask those questions of each of those platforms. Is this the right fit for my film? You should at this point have a good understanding of who your audience is. And of course, there's always going to be outliers, people who come across it, but really who is your core audience? How are they watching films? And you can find that out through, reading, viewing reports online. But also just do some anecdotal data, right? Like if you made the film, you probably know some people who would like that film. Ask them,
Yeah.
hey, where do you look at films? Where do you find out about them? And don't waste your money on a platform where they aren't,
Yeah.
where people aren't going there. So, again, it takes a lot of thought, but these are things that distributors would be doing. And so if you don't have a distributor, you're kind of,
You have to generate that bit. Yes. It's have a goal, know your audience, create a long-term plan to maximize revenue at the different stages. And what you're saying is like, ask questions, listen. And
yeah.
if I'm hearing correctly, like pivot. If it's not working, hopefully you've got some agreements in place that give you some flexibility, or if you're fully in control of your distribution, you're not locked in to a 3 to 5 year distribution deal. So if you see something's not working or the ads you're running to drive to your TVOD, your SVOD, or your AVOD aren't generating, you pivot or try something else or move on to the next phase of the release. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And also say, like, to really summarize the value of windowing is that windowing gives the film, it creates this downstream of revenue where the marketing and exposure is accumulating over the life of the film. That's what gets the long tail going. If you premiere in theaters and 6 years later put it out on your personal website, you've lost that marketing and exposure, right? So it's really about the snowball effect. And so wherever you're first premiering the film, again, it could be theatrically, it could be, digitally, it could be in a community space in your own town, you want to leverage that. That is the idea that by holding these windows open for longer, you're creating demand, you're creating exclusivity, you are creating marketing and that word of mouth that will continue. So when you then do your SVOD premiere, when you then put it out on physical media, you are coming back to remind people. You're always selling to a few new folks, but for the most part, you're reminding people. And so it may take them a few reminders to finally engage with your film, but you're not starting from ground zero every single time.
This is true. I think there's some report somewhere said, this is why this is not a news podcast. Some report said it takes about 7 touch points before someone will make a actual transaction.
Yeah. And I've heard the evolution of that in digital is like, if your only touch point is digital, like social media, it takes like 20 or 25 touch points.
Oh my goodness.
Also newsletters, websites, like don't just put it on meta and think that someone saw an ad. Like, think about the last time you engaged with something because you saw an ad one time.
I will almost never click on the ad. But once the ad has chased me around the internet 10 times, I'm like, okay, I'll buy the shoes. All right.
Yeah.
So if you got me, I'm in. If you've worn me down.
Yeah.
Well, this is so again, I could keep going on 100 different topics. But it's specific to windowing. Is there anything else you think a filmmaker should know? Like the one or two things before they start building out that strategy? What do you wish they knew?
Really understand your core audience. And to do that, that means you need to first think in your own mind's eye, who's going to be at the premiere of this film? Delete friends and family who are there to support you. Who is there? What connects them? Is it an interest? Is it a culture? Is it an identity that they all share? Why are they there? And then you can take that audience and think about, how are they engaging? How are they getting their information? How are they getting information about movies? Right there, you've built yourself a core audience, a demographic profile, and you've built out a potential marketing plan for those people. The next thing that you want to think about is how you're going to engage those people to spread word of mouth. So that is, how are you going to give these people access to the film in a way that they can turn around and tell people about it? And it may be you're giving them access at a film festival. The film's not coming out for 3 months. So by following up with those people 3 months from now, you say like, hey, we're now playing in your town. Here's the 2-for-1 ticket. You saw this film, you loved it. Bring a friend. Share this email with a friend, that type of thing. So that's your core audience. They're going to be excellent evangelizers for you in terms of marketing. So I'd say that's really important. The second is know in advance what you realistically can spend on distribution and marketing. I would say at minimum have $50,000, upwards to 200. You really don't need to go above 200 to kind of have a gangbusters situation. And consider every expense. When you're considering things like, a lot of times people will just knee jerk, here's the things I got to do. I've got to have an EPK. I've got to hire a publicist for the festival. I've got to do this and that. Throw that all out the window and ask yourself, what do you actually need? Maybe you have a friend who works in PR. Maybe you don't need PR because that's not what you're going for, right? Maybe it makes more sense to spend money on building some sort of tiny takeaway that you give to every person in the audience and they go out in the world, right? So there's that. And then think in advance about who your community partners are going to be. Because to make this successful, whether you're picked up by a distributor or not, you need people beyond your audience who are going to help support you. There are people all over the country running incredible organizations. It could be small businesses. It could be nonprofit organizations. It could be special interest groups, people who are going to be interested in your film. There's usually at least 1 or 2 organizations associated with that. And how can you leverage them? A great one that kind of covers most indie films is AARP. That is, I don't even know what it stands for.
Wait, AARP, like the retirement kind of older adult
Yes,
community? I mean, they're very active in movie going.
Yes, exactly.
I don't think you can join until you're like 65.
Yeah,
They're amazing.
For events to do. They are great partners for, if the film is a right fit, to buy out screenings, but they'll also market on your behalf. So those community outreach partners is not just a thing to check off, but it's really, how can I develop it? I recommend establishing 1 to 2 areas. Look for the largest version of that organization, a national organization, and then drill down from there, right? AARP is national, but they have local chapters. So you start with national, and then you find out, I'm going to be in these 4 markets. Or maybe AARP says, that film's incredible. You know where it's going to play great? Tucson, Arizona. You never would have thought that. So now you're playing in Tucson. So you really want to leverage the knowledge that you can gain from those community partners. So those would be the 3 things. Know who your core audience is, establish in advance with yourself, with your investors, with everyone on your team, what is the amount of money you have to spend on distribution and marketing? Is it contingent on something else? And establishing those community outreach partners. And the last thing I'll say is that audiences understand the release of a film through the experience of the film. So they don't know if the screening that they're watching in a movie theater is theatrical or non-theatrical, right? They don't know if you four-walled the cinema or
True.
if part of their ticket is going to the box office report. All they know is they showed up in community, watched the film, had a great experience. So I wouldn't get too hung up on, is my film theatrically playing? Am I just booking out theaters myself? Did it premiere on SVOD? Did it premiere on AVOD? The average person just wants to see the movie. Make it accessible and make it as affordable as you can.
That is excellent advice. So for filmmakers listening, for anyone in the industry, where can we find you online and where can we find the Film Festival Alliance?
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on my website, barbaratwist.com. And then for Film Festival Alliance, you can find us at filmfestivalalliance.org. I highly recommend you check out our brand new film festival directory. Those are member film festivals who have provided immense transparency around their programming strategies, what they're looking for, their programming teams, things like accessibility, what they offer filmmakers. It is a great place to start for research if you're thinking, what film festivals do I apply to? Go to filmfestivalalliance.org, search for the film festival directory, and we've got about 120 film festivals already. It's growing every day, where you can really dig in and find the right fit for your film.
Oh, that's so cool. I actually did not even know that. So thank you. Good tidbit for me. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. All right. Have a wonderful day.
Bye. And that's our episode. Thank you to our special guest, our producer and editor, Ron Pissarro, and you, the filmmakers, creators, marketers, and distributors that are dedicated to connecting audiences with great films.